In 1999, following 70 years of communist dominance, a young democrat named Vladimir Putin rose to power in Russia, pledging to voters progressive reforms, freedom of speech, and the transformation of the nation into a great and flourishing European state. His promises were met with much anticipation, offering a vision of a brighter future for the country. However, 24 years following that momentous election, the Russian populace now finds itself residing in a terrorist, decaying nation, burdened by numerous sanctions, and under the leadership of a confirmed war criminal whose connections are limited solely to impoverished African countries and oppressive Asian totalitarian regimes. Experts offer a straightforward explanation for this degradation of Putin and consequently the entire country, his challenging childhood, and the Kremlin leader's psychological issues. Is this really the case? You'll find out next. My name is Sofia Kozhevnik, and this is 12 Minutes on the Secrets of the Kremlin leader, Putin, and his childhood traumas. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. By doing so, you'll support independent journalism. For a long time, little was known about the origin and childhood of the future dictator. For quite a while, the same general information was repeated in open sources. Reportedly, Vladimir Putin was born on October 7, 1952, in Leningrad to an ordinary working-class family. His father was a frontline soldier and his mother was a cleaner. His parents actually had two other sons before him, Albert, who tragically passed away from whooping cough as an infant back in 1934, and Victor, who sadly died at just 2 months old during the horrific siege of Leningrad in 1942. But in reality, everything turned out to be not so simple and straightforward. A Polish journalist, Krystyna Kurczab-Redlich, shed light on Putin's origins. She's been investigating Vladimir Putin's biography since 1997, and she has unique research findings, which she published in her book Vova, Volodya, Vladimir: The Secrets of Putin's Russia. She managed to find out that Putin was raised by adoptive parents and lived with his biological mother until he was 8 years old at most. He never once saw his biological father at all. She also found out that he had been in 3 different families during the 1950s and 1960s before he was ultimately placed with his adoptive family in Leningrad. The Russian president's biological mother was named Vera Nikolaevna Osipashvili, née Putina. This woman was born in 1926 in the tiny village of Teryokino, located near the town of Ochar, within Russia's Perm-Krai region. Following the Second World War, she attended a technical college, and there she encountered Platon Privalov. They started a relationship. However, the man didn't tell her he was already married. Vera Putina unexpectedly discovered the existence of his wife while she was already pregnant. She returned to her parents' home in Teryokino to give birth. It was there, in a nearby hospital, that Volodya Putin was born. This, however, actually occurred in 1950, not 1952, contrary to what is written in the official biography of the current Russian dictator. For the greater part of her existence, Vladimir Putin's mother resided in Meteki, a village located in Georgia's Kaspi municipality, specifically positioned along the Kura River. She passed away on May 31st of this year, having reached the impressive age of 97. In the year 2019, journalist Krystyna Kurczab-Redlich paid her a visit. The woman openly acknowledged her kinship with the Russian ruler, and she also revealed that he had resided with her in Georgia for a period. She first publicly declared her association with the unchanging ruler back in 1999, the very year Vladimir Putin ascended to the presidency. She recounted to the journalist that she had seen her son on television, instantly recognizing his distinctive gait, claiming he moved much like a duck. At that point, the woman had reached 73 years of age. She started telling everyone nearby that the Russian president was her long-lost child. She consistently maintained that she had never forgotten her Volodya. However, she strongly wished she could have, especially after Russia's aggression against Georgia in 2008. Throughout her entire life, the woman felt the shame of having abandoned her son in childhood. She always hoped he would visit Meteki, allowing her to seek his forgiveness. Little Volodya's initial family was not his birth mother, but rather his maternal grandparents residing in Teryokino. Vera entrusted her newborn child to their care, then departed for an internship in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. It was in that place where she encountered a Georgian soldier, Georgi Osipashvili, and they swiftly got married. Going against the customs of his own people, he pledged to the woman that he would embrace her son as if he were his very own and ensure a respectable life for them both. In reality, the woman faced poverty and domestic violence, but she didn't leave her husband and, a year later, asked her mother to bring her son to her. As journalist Kristina Kurcza-Bredlik writes, little Vova was, for the first time, moved from one place to another like a package. And that's how he ended up in his second family. This is where he experienced his first psychological trauma. The young boy then comprehended that the woman he believed to be his mother was, in fact, his grandmother. He found himself in a foreign country, with foreign languages and culture, living in the same house with a woman who was essentially a stranger and a cruel stepfather. In patriarchal Georgian families, children born out of wedlock are considered a disgrace. So his stepfather would beat the boy with his hand or a stick, often denied him food, and threw him out into the street barefoot. However, Vera Nikolaevna denies her son was beaten. She says her husband only scolded him and threatened to kick him out because the boy often tormented the neighbors' chickens with a slingshot. Social interactions were also difficult for him. Teased as an illegitimate child, he grew up very withdrawn and reclusive. He dedicated the majority of his leisure to fishing along the Kura River, a place where Joseph Djugashvili also once cast his line, and he participated in sambo lessons alongside his single companion. Even then, the boy would experience sudden fits of rage. For instance, when wrestling, he'd become extremely angry, unwilling to accept defeat. In Georgia, Putin began attending school. Indeed, in 2008, the Daily Telegraph revealed that he had actually been a student at an educational institution in Meteki, Georgia, for a period of 3 years. He loved to read, especially Russian fables, and had excellent handwriting. Journalist Kristina Kurcza-Bredlik discovered he was very lonely, frequently hungry, and often shabbily dressed. His mother's husband, Georgi Osepashvili, so strongly disliked the boy that he ended up with a third family. His stepfather's sister took the boy as far away from the village as possible, all the way to the capital of the Georgian Soviet Republic, Tbilisi. The child was given to a childless colonel's family to be raised. And here, according to Kristina Kurcza-Bredlik, his mother, Vera Nikolaevna, intervened. She decided the child would be better with relatives and took him to her parents in Teryokino. She confided to the journalist that he was truly miserable and wept uncontrollably when he bade her farewell. Vera Nikolaevna didn't want to return to Georgia, where poverty and an aggressive husband waited. More than anything, she dreamed of studying, but for the sake of the daughters born from her marriage to Osepashvili, she went back to Georgia. At that moment, she had no idea she was seeing her own son for the last time. Later, the woman was told that Putin had been sent to a military boarding school. After that, she lost contact with him, until one day she heard he was in the KGB. Indeed, the boy did not stay long at his grandparents' house. They were quite aged and rather frail. They had older, childless relatives residing in St. Petersburg, which was then known as Leningrad Vladimir Spiridonovich and Maria Ivanovna Putin. Their 2 sons had died at a young age, but the woman dreamed of having a child more than anything. So, as Kristina Kurcza-Bredlik writes, little Volodya was once again sent off like a package to the city on the Neva River. However, it wasn't to a school, but to a new family. A lot of evidence suggests the boy was not the biological son of the Leningrad Putins. This particularly includes that Maria Ivanovna was never seen pregnant, nor later with a baby or a stroller. Suddenly, in 1960, a school-aged child, whom she referred to as her son, emerged from seemingly nowhere. The new parents changed the child's birth certificate. So, instead of 1950, the document now showed October 7, 1952. Biographers explain this move by the fact that the boy didn't know Russian well. To facilitate his language acquisition, the 9-year-old was placed back into the 1st grade for a second time. It wasn't obvious that the boy was older. He was quite small and very thin. Putin's adoptive parents were a model of a traditional Soviet working-class family. His mother, Maria Ivanovna, worked as a cleaner, and his father, Vladimir Spiridonovich, was a low-paid laborer at a factory. The family lived in an old, dirty communal apartment, which they shared with 2 other families. This home lacked both heating and a bathroom. Instead, cockroaches and rats cohabited alongside the residents. Putin, armed with a stick, often hunted the latter in the courtyard. However, this childhood adventure had a grim ending. One day, the biggest rat, which the boy had backed into a corner, started to attack him. Later, in recalling this very tale, the dictator would articulate that no individual ought to ever experience being cornered, nor should anyone confront a predicament without any exit. It is highly probable that as a child, Putin perceived himself to be in a predicament with his adoptive parents, as the true nature of Maria Ivanovna's maternal role remains largely unknown, while the notorious reputation of his father's harshness has endured even now. Vladimir Spiridonovich often beat his adopted son with a belt for his hooliganism. At that time, this was a common method for raising children, but in Putin's case, it was used with particular cruelty. In her book, the journalist notes that all tyrants were beaten as children: Hitler, Mussolini, Robespierre, Osama bin Laden. And certainly, not every child subjected to beatings develops into a cruel adult. However, there is undoubtedly a kernel of truth in this assumption. Putin likely considered his adoptive father's violence as normal, as there was never any hint of resentment towards Vladimir Spiridonovich in his recollections. In a film by Russian propagandist Andrei Kondrashov, tellingly titled Putin, the dictator proudly shared that his father had served in a destruction battalion of the NKVD, and his grandfather, Spiridon Ivanovich, had been a cook for Lenin and subsequently for Stalin. Kristina Kurchabredlik asserts that Putin's NKVD stepfather instilled in him an unwavering adoration for Stalin and a deep appreciation for strong, unyielding communism, a sentiment from which he never truly recovered. Psychologists are also convinced that the severity of his parents and the constant struggle for survival provoked profound psychological traumas and ingrained childhood complexes. Even as a child, Putin was known for his meanness and cunning. Time magazine writes about this, citing his teachers and classmates. His peers recall that the entire school suffered from the boy's terror. Putin actively engaged in schoolyard brawls, always being the first to throw a punch when conflict flared up, and he'd stand his ground to the bitter end. He wasn't particularly physically gifted, yet he always emerged victorious, fighting with a ferocity as if each encounter was his last, scratching, biting, and hair-pulling. But it wasn't just the children who suffered from the bully, but also the teachers, whom he drove to despair with his stubbornness and disdain for learning. In elementary school, he garnered a terrible reputation, and at the age of 12, he advanced from 4th to 5th grade carrying 2 failing grades. The difficult character of the future Kremlin leader was also confirmed by his teacher, Vera Gurevich, in her book, Vladimir Putin. Parents, Friends, Teachers, published in 2004. Remarkably, this work underwent multiple reprints, yet each subsequent edition saw its content reduced by omitting less flattering details from the state leader's life story. For example, at 14, Putin broke a classmate's leg during a fight. When his teacher reprimanded him for resolving disputes with force, the boy replied that some people only understand the language of violence. Apparently, he decided to stick to this principle from then on. The lives of others meant nothing to Putin, even from a young age, the teacher writes. Back in 1969, she led the class on an excursion to Lithuania. By the lake, the children spent a considerable amount of time preparing the ducks, before jointly deciding to slaughter and then consume them. Not a single child dared to carry out this cruel act. Ultimately, it was young Vova Putin who offered to end the birds' lives. Vera Gurevich stated that it requires an exceptionally cruel character to painstakingly tame a living creature over such a long period, only to then betray its trust and take its life. The future dictator's childhood was spent in Leningrad's communal courtyards, where only the strongest survived and jungle law prevailed. Putin associated with the local lads whose role models were the self-styled gangsters and criminal kingpins. As a teenager, Putin was part of a street gang, writes his teacher Vera Gurevich. The rules there were like in a prison zone. There were bosses and their servants. Such an atmosphere was hardly suitable for a young boy. Alcohol, fights, foul language, crime. But he cut all ties with the gang when its leader was put behind bars. Nevertheless, the adult Putin would recall those days with considerable fondness and warmth. In a 2001 interview for the book Vladimir Putin, A Life Story, he mentioned that the streets of Leningrad had taught him to always attack first, and he likened his childhood to the movie the sandpit generals. Upon Vova Putin reaching the age of 16, a profound yearning took root in his consciousness, one that would notably shape the entirety of his future trajectory. He made up his mind that he wished to become a spy. The boy persistently gathered details on how to join the KGB. To move closer to his aspirations, he began studying more diligently and enrolled in combat sambo alongside a friend. Naturally, I was a hooligan. They simply wouldn't admit me into the pioneers, but then they accepted me once I took up wrestling sambo, judo, and I gradually started to transform, the dictator recounted to Russian propagandist Andrei Kondrashov in his film, Putin. In 1970, after completing his schooling, he became a law student, and it was during his studies that he began working as a freelance agent for the KGB. It is quite plausible that the connections and influence he acquired within this particular organization significantly aided Putin in concealing his true origins for such an extended period. In 2000, two journalists, a Chechen and an Italian, who were investigating the story of Vera Mikhailovna Ochalashvili, tragically perished in separate unfortunate accidents. They had previously visited Putin's biological mother at home and taken her blood for DNA analysis. She never heard the result, although she already knew what it would be. Notably, the Russian president's adoptive parents, who died in the 90s, also never spoke publicly about their son, just as he never spoke about them. Very little is widely known about Putin's family and childhood. These stories are mostly shrouded in rumors and speculation. And central to the dictator's biography is the aspiration of a Leningrad working-class son to join the KGB. In fact, his choice of profession deepened the psychological problems that his difficult childhood had already provoked. During his tenure with the State Security Committee, he developed a habit of employing terrorist methods and violence to achieve his goals. They claimed the end justifies the means. Notably, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini also adhered to similar reasoning. This was stated after the annexation of Crimea by Zbigniew Brzezinski, the national security advisor to the 39th U.S. President, Jimmy Carter. He believes terrorist leaders are distinguished by their exceptionalism. They truly believe they are destined to fulfill their historic mission, firmly convinced that no one else could ever accomplish it. Putin also exhibits narcissism. Psychoanalysts say this trait in terrorists develops from childhood. Chronic physical violence and emotional humiliation contribute to a profound sense of fear and vulnerability. Individuals employ violence against others as a means to confront their deepest internal fears, striving to eradicate the perception of themselves as a helpless victim within their own consciousness, thereby making themselves more bearable to their own self-perception. Experts attribute the Kremlin dictator's initiation of a full-scale war against Ukraine to his profound desire to exhibit his own paramount significance to the entire world. Putin doesn't need this war for the sake of Russia or for the great Russian people, but rather for his personal self-affirmation. War, in this context, serves as a defensive mechanism for a sociopathic and narcissistic terrorist, whose criminal acts stem directly from a multitude of deep-seated personal fears. The fear of once again becoming that humiliated and unwanted brawler from the Leningrad communal apartment. These memories fill him with rage and a desire to instill fear in everyone around him. However, the entire civilized world feels contempt and hatred for him. And into world history, Putin will not enter as a distinguished statesman, but rather as a deplorable war criminal, a terrorist, and a killer who utterly failed to conquer his own inner demons. That was 12 minutes. My name is Sofia Kozhevnik. If you found this video engaging, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and definitely let us know in the comments. Were you aware of the truth about Putin's early life, and do you believe a challenging childhood can significantly impact an individual's future? Until next time.